Hello, and welcome to Inventors Helping Inventors. I'm your host, Alan Beckley, inventor of the Wonder Wallet. If you're an inventor searching for proven ways to make money with your invention, if you dream to see your product selling in stores everywhere, you've come to the right place. There's no better place to get help than from experts, inventors who've already achieved success. Every week, I interview successful inventors, asking them the questions you want to know. Tune in to learn from the experts so you can get your invention out of the tank and into the bank.
Your plane goes to taxi on a runway and then eventually go take off. This anti-icing coating is actually going to get basically blown off of the wing. So you cannot carry the gel with you on your flight. The challenge with this though, and the reason why this is happening is because while pilots in the cockpit have all these sensors that tell them what the aircraft is doing, so engine RPM, your altitude, your GPS, where you're positioning in the world, radios, all these different things, that what they're actually missing is there's no feedback loop that actually connects pilots or drones or autonomous aircraft even with what their aircraft skin is experiencing.
What's the most difficult part of inventing? It's not the creative process of inventing a new product. It's not even navigating the patent process. The most difficult part is marketing your product so you can make money from it. If you're like most inventors, you love inventing and creating, but you hate marketing. Maybe you'd prefer to turn the marketing of your product over to an agency that claims to have helped hundreds of inventors. Unfortunately, that's expensive and always ends badly. Here's the good news. Marketing is a learnable skill, and I can teach you, empower you to market your own invention through a proven, effective process. Sound intriguing? If you're a serious inventor who's ready to learn how to license your invention to get it to market sooner rather than later, my product-to-market training could be right for you. Through 7 hours of one-on-one, in-depth training, I will show you how to create a clear, concise, compelling marketing message for your product. I'll show you how to use a new AI agent to find 30 or more companies in just minutes that could be great partners to license your product. Then we'll use another AI agent that looks at your top 10 companies and then finds names, titles, email addresses, and LinkedIn profiles of up to 100 contacts. Armed with all this, I'll work with you to design a step-by-step process for you to use to reach out to companies and contacts with your clear, compelling message. Then you're ready to begin contacting the companies yourself. I'm planning to work with no more than 2 inventors through the product-to-market training. If this sounds like something you'd like to explore, to finally get your product off the sidelines and into the market, let's talk and see if this program is a fit for you. Just email me at alan@alanbeckley.com and put in the subject line, Product to Market. I'll reach out to you and schedule a time for us to talk. Again, just email me at alan@alanbeckley.com. Put Product to Market in the subject line. I look forward to talking to you. Welcome to episode number 636. Today, I interview Cole Rosentreter. Cole Rosentreter grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. After 9/11, Cole felt a calling to service and enlisted in the Canadian Army, where he was a paratrooper. He deployed all over the world for 15 years, and in the process, learned a great deal about tactical use of technology in aviation. Returning home from the military to Western Canada, he was surprised to learn that the state-of-the-art in fighting wildfires comprised lookouts on towers, binoculars, and pilots using paper maps. He saw a need for more effective solutions, so in 2018 he founded Pegasus Imagery to develop intelligence-driven solutions capable of transforming complex challenges like wildfire management. Today, Cole continues to drive the strategic direction and product roadmap for Pegasus, as its mission and product lines have evolved and expanded far beyond wildfire management. A primary focus for the company today is a technology called MIDAS, for Moisture and Icing Detection Alert System. MIDAS is applied to aircraft surfaces to accurately detect the locations and severity of ice in real time. MIDAS allows pilots to go beyond the traditional fly, no-fly decisions based on limited weather forecasts to accurately assess the conditions specific to their specific aircraft and its specific location. MIDAS is currently being tested with Boeing Chinook helicopters. Cole anticipates soon that every MIDAS-equipped aircraft will become part of a larger, crowdsourced network of many aircraft that will work much like Google Maps uses for crowdsourcing traffic data. You'll want to listen to this entire interview where Cole describes how he learned that aircraft icing risk is based on much more than cold temperatures, and that some of the greatest risks occur in places you'd not expect, such as coastal Florida, South Korea, and Japan. Also, how the strongest early adopters of the MIDAS technology has come from the defense sector, particularly helicopters that typically fly lower than 10,000 feet. And finally, why he feels that MIDAS will soon spread to non-aviation sectors, including agriculture, mining, and forestry. Now let's get right to our interview with Cole Rosentreter. Cole Rosentreter, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast with us once again today.
Alan, it's great to reconnect.
Cole, when you and I last spoke a bit over 18 months ago in December of 2024, and for our listeners, that was episode 469, your company, Pegasus Imagery, was deploying drones in Canada, the U.S., and elsewhere to provide real-time imagery in often dangerous environments, and particularly for fighting wildfires. But in that episode, you shared with our listeners how wildfires in Western Canada in particular were growing in number, ferocity, and intensity. And through Pegasus Imagery, you deploy sophisticated drones providing real-time imagery that use cutting-edge technology to improve response to wildfires and other natural disasters. But in that episode, you described how your company has expanded much further into the realm of aviation services and drones. And you've evolved your technology service offerings to include MIDAS, an early detection and warning system for ice formation on wings and other critical aircraft structures. But I'm excited to catch up with you and learn how things have progressed and evolved in the last 18 months. Can you share with our listeners a bit more about MIDAS? For example, why is ice formation a risk on aircraft, and how is MIDAS an improvement compared to conventional methods used for this? Also, in what industries are you seeing the greatest demand for the MIDAS technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you the quick walk on, and for your listeners, in case you don't have like an aviation background, when you get on a plane, and most people have had this experience, I think, you get on a plane and it's potentially at the shoulder season, like fall or the winter or early spring, depending anywhere around the world where you're at. Oftentimes the plane will go over to a separate bay and it will basically get two coatings. They'll get a de-icing spray, where they're essentially trying to put this fluid, this chemical onto the wings on the body of the aircraft to remove any ice and not let it form while the aircraft is parked at the gate. Then they apply basically an anti-ice coating. So essentially to try now, and this is the interesting part, it can't be too sticky, but the idea here is that this coating will then prevent icing from being able to form for a certain period of time. That period of time is when you leave the de-icing bay and your plane goes to taxi on a runway and then eventually go take off. This anti-icing coating is actually going to get basically blown off of the wing. So you cannot carry the gel with you on your flight. The challenge with this though, and the reason why this is happening is because while pilots in the cockpit have all these sensors that tell them what the aircraft is doing, so engine RPM, your altitude, your GPS, where you position in the world, radios, all these different things, that what they're actually missing is there's no feedback loop that actually connects pilots or drones or autonomous aircraft even with what their aircraft skin is experiencing. So For aviation, we're essentially missing one of those key sensing elements that all humans have, which is touch. So this missing gap is what you run into this issue around not procedural and overly safe, I would say, kind of backstops when it comes to, we think that the weather forecast calls for this potential icing in the forecast. If you don't have an aircraft that's rated to be able to fly into non-icing conditions, which means that it's been over-engineered by quite a bit in order to be able to safely enter and then safely exit or escape icing conditions in flight, it's too big of a safety risk if all of our flights get rescheduled, rerouted, or just straight canceled. So you can imagine that for aviation, no aircraft really has an idea of what's actually happening in flight based on the weather they're actually flying through. So MIDAS is really like an intelligence skin. The core problem that we're solving here is really twofold. We have this intelligence skin that is flexible, and we can either have it wirelessly attached to an aircraft in multiple different locations, or we can direct wire it and actually integrate it completely into the aircraft electronics and avionics. In both cases, what this gives is a real-time feedback loop to either crew in the cockpit, or if it's like a UAS or a drone, like ground station, they have no idea what's actually happening to the aircraft. This provides this additional sensor layer that's really been missing in aviation.
And I like the fact that you laid out 2 or 3 key points, and especially for the fact that our listeners, if they're not engineers or aerospace engineers or in the aviation business generally, they may not be really greatly aware of it, other than that somehow in the wintertime, sometimes when they're flying, they spray something on the wings of the airplane and they might make mention about icing and de-icing. But I like that you say it's actually a 2-part component, that you spray. First of all, if it's about to depart, you spray the de-icing on to try to remove the ice that may already be there while it's been sitting at the terminal. And then you spray a de-icing on. And as I understood that, the de-icer doesn't tend to last very long because as it accelerates for takeoff, most of that comes off. Was that correct?
That's exactly right. And so it's this weird charts and tables that they use, and they try and pull some different weather data from nearby, from around the airport, from ground-based stations, and kind of the weather forecast and weather radar to try and make an assessment of what this kind of holdover time is, and how long you have until this fluid is potentially no longer to be effective.
Then you also described in a really elegant way that up until now, we've lacked the technology to have the sort of almost a sense of feel, the skin of the aircraft, just as our own skins can sense temperatures and pressures and many other things that isn't naturally functionally built into aircraft. And so that you've introduced or put this technology through with what you call MIDAS. And again, I think you said it can be both applied directly or it can be wired into it. Could you tell us a little bit more about if somebody brings an airplane to you and they want to do that, kind of how you go about applying MIDAS, how long it might take, and roughly the cost of doing that?
Let me start with who has the highest pain point. And this might help walk us on a little bit to this. Our friends over at Boeing or Airbus, what they would say is for the big commercial aircraft, this is a very long certification process. And if you're going to try to get something actually wired into an aircraft, you're talking years, and you have to make the whole case upfront and have people buy into it. What we found is the highest pain point is actually on the defense side. So not the supersonic jets necessarily that are flying at 30, 40,000 feet. It's actually the military helicopters or vertical lift, because they're essentially flying below 10,000 feet every day. They want to fly at night. They want to fly in conditions that are low visibility, where most likely actually going to be experiencing potential icing conditions or other weather impacts to their flights. So what they have though is probably the highest pain point, because they don't really care necessarily about fuel, the price of fuel. They care about mission and be able to execute. So if you think even as basic as like search and rescue, and you want the Coast Guard to be able to fly that helicopter out to go and pick up that person who's having a heart attack on the fishing ship off the coast, they really care about this. And so what we've been able to do with the wireless system is really shortcut the development piece and getting air sensors on the aircraft. 2 years ago, pretty much just, I think, shortly after we had our last connection, we actually were able to get a public press release with our partners over at Boeing on this. So for the last 2.5 years, we've been working with Boeing and the Royal Canadian Air Force as our initial testing customer on their Chinook fleet. So the big heavy lift military helicopters. And so our sensors, the wireless ones, have been basically peeled and patched, and then have been working to collect in-flight data on the sheets. And what this has allowed us to do is get really unique insights on not just where icing builds up on an aircraft, but potential impacts to the rest of the aircraft. So as we're flying, how can that icing potentially impact aerodynamics, additional weight? And really what this allows us to do is get a better feel for how we can make aviation a lot safer, especially for people who are flying at night, where looking out the window to see icing begin to form is really like the main default of how most people are trying to detect icing in flight. You can't really do that when you're flying under night vision goggles, 500 feet off the ground, and you're flying very low visibility. So what we found is it's worked out extremely well for us, partnering with both major OEMs as well as the actual end users themselves, getting their feedback on how best to integrate our system. And the wireless system allows us to move those sensors around on an aircraft, test different locations, and really give them a multi-point or a dozen or more different locations on an aircraft. So they're not just relying on one icing detector, they're relying on a number of different locations, giving them a much better picture of what's actually happening in flight.
Well, thanks. That gives a clearer picture. And I wanted to just query on a couple of particular elements you spoke about. First of all, I think you highlighted that a challenge with, say, Airbus and Boeing and for civilian aircraft flying for the airlines and things is there's a very long certification and approval process that it takes for the FAA and the other agencies to approve changes to the aircraft because of safety concerns. But unfortunately, it can also derail something new that could be added more quickly, as I understood it. But perhaps the best place to begin and that you've looked at is on the defense side, and particularly military helicopters, where there's a great need for this. And for those who maybe don't understand, helicopters are extremely highly maneuverable aircraft. And so that means if there's issues, then they're going to be, from my perspective, multiplied compared to a more stable, for lack of a better term, like a 737 when it takes off. Its flight envelope is generally pretty stable, and it's not going through all sorts of maneuverability like a helicopter might, and especially a military helicopter. And in that scenario, icing on the rotors and things could be really bad news. But what I wanted to ask you about was, so is this situation worse, say, below 10,000 feet? Because you always think of high elevation as being much, much colder as you get to altitude than lower elevation. Does it have to do with density, or why is, say, under 10,000 feet a particularly problematic area?
Generally speaking, because of two main factors. One, the amount of moisture in the air, so the density and the relative humidity in the air, as well as temperature. So it's not when you get below freezing, it's a range above the freezing point where you can actually get into major issues. And interestingly enough, in our travels, what we figured out is areas where you wouldn't necessarily think about it. So Japan, South Korea, parts of the Pacific, the coast of Florida are all actually a little bit more prone than other areas you could think to in-flight icing. So how this works, though, unfortunately, Alan, is icing is extremely difficult to detect compared to when we look at using the existing systems on Earth observation or satellites or ground stations or weather. So you're really relying on pilots sending a pilot report, or what's called a PIREP. It's essentially a pilot flying, and then they experience something like, say, in-flight icing, and they basically get on the radio and broadcast to the regional area or whoever's on that frequency for the neighborhood what they just encountered. That PIREP is their way of trying to warn others about this. That's a qualitative piece of feedback that a pilot gives, right? That's based on their experience. They might say it's severe icing, but how are you actually going to be able to measure what is 20 millimeters of icing on your wing while you're still trying to fly a plane and all those other different factors? So the bigger opportunity for us is actually, it's a global problem in short. And I guess what we're finding on the military side especially is that this isn't just about how do we keep you safe when you inadvertently get into icing conditions. How do we give you that very quick second by second real-time feedback loop on where do you have icing? Is it getting worse? What's the height of the icing? That type of thing like that. It's really about looking at building out in the same way that we're measuring what the aircraft ski is experiencing on one aircraft. That gives that pilot that decision making. The bigger picture for us is actually networking all of these aircraft together to because everything we put our sensors onto turns them into a flying weather station. So if we build that out and we start looking at not just one aircraft, but 50, 100, 500, 5,000, 50,000 over time, now you start having aircraft that are all basically crowdsourcing in-flight weather data. And it may not be icing, but it will help us compare it, combine that, and fuse that with other different data sources. And then now we have, essentially, we get rid of forecasts, and now it's really about what are the real-time conditions. So across military or commercial or general aviation, the idea here is to build really the world's most accurate picture of in-flight weather, because detecting icing is extremely tough. They say this region, where this 50 or 100 nautical mile kind of area might have light to moderate icing at this particular time. But there's no real way of knowing unless you actually get into it. So the opportunity for us is support the pilots with the real-time feedback in case they run into issues, or then they actually can get out of potential icing conditions early. And then on a larger picture, the network effect, really, it's building a community of aircraft that are all sharing their data to help make aviation safer for everybody.
For our listeners, the way I get this is one of the challenges, or has been a big challenge with icing, is, for lack of a better term, it's kind of line of sight, where you look back and you can see ice on the wings. But unfortunately, by the time you do that, it's perhaps a little bit late. That just doesn't give you much valuable information. And sometimes you can't see well anyways, especially when it's dark. But instead, if you can actually have real-time data collection on the wings, on the surfaces, that now feeds back in a much more analytical and detailed way, what is the characteristics of the icing forming, and where is it thickest, et cetera. Now you can make much more intelligent decisions, once again, in real time, the way I understand it. And that's a huge benefit of MIDAS, because it takes something that before was anecdotal and observational, and now you're turning into something where it's moment by moment analytical decision making. Is that accurate?
That's exactly what it is. And so there is ice detectors on most commercial aircraft for reference, as well as the big military fixed-wing aircraft like C-130 and such. What's missing, though, is those sensors are all like a single sensor mounted somewhere on the aircraft, and basically when that sensor, that single point, detects icing, it tells the pilot, and then the pilot doesn't know from there how bad it actually is. So there's no measurement of, hey, you have icing built up in the leading edge of your wing. It's this height. This is the rate of change. This is basically how is it getting worse? Is it getting thicker or thinner? You basically have a warning that, hey, you have icing. But what the pilots end up doing is defaulting to a checklist that says, all right, assume the worst possible icing profile that we have and activate your de-icing system or your anti-icing system if you have it. And from there, basically, you modify your altitude. You might have to cancel your flight, reroute, go around. But probably the biggest impact is actually before people take off. If we look at the weather forecast, outside the military and aircraft like commercial airlines that have a requirement and they have to fly on time, and they also have those aircraft that are rated to be able to survive flight into non-icing conditions, that certification level, people don't fly. And in a lot of cases, even on the military side, they'll look at the weather forecast, and if the temperature is within a certain range and a relative humidity of there's visible moisture, like clouds, they may not fly. And I'm not talking about being up in Alaska or northern Canada or Greenland. I'm talking about all over the world. It was a pretty severe plane crash almost 2 years ago now in Brazil. It killed 62 people. And now it's because of in-flight icing. And there was no way of them really knowing until it was too late to be done into it. Too late. They didn't know that icing front was really in front of them. And by the time they got into it, they didn't have a tight enough feedback loop to activate their de-icing system. Now that's based on the initial report that came out last year. Well, everyone. But I'm pretty confident that what we're talking about in general is this gives people the ability to not just survive or be able to react in time when they experience this. It's really about giving people the opportunity to actually fly safely and actually go on mission or take that flight over the California coast when the weather forecast is pretty hard to rely on. So most people just default to what's safe is staying on the ground. We want to try and change that by getting aircraft to be able to fly where they're safely able to do it more often. And then once they're in the air, sharing that information with other aircraft they may not even know to be able to make everything safer for everybody else in aviation.
Yeah, I like that a lot. In other words, you really, as you said, sharing the information, et cetera. And when you talk about the idea that now instead of just one aircraft, many could have it, sometimes it's been called swarm technology kind of things that you could then have multiple aircraft in a given area, for example, sharing their feedback. And then as you were describing this, and you were talking about people naturally going to default to the safer side, when in doubt, just don't fly. Now it expands the envelope of how they can judge that safety, but now they can do it more intelligently, which presumably could allow them to fly in conditions that they might have otherwise by default chosen not to fly into. Is that right?
Exactly. And I think for the most relatable instances, whether it's you're driving with your phone or you have an in-dash display, we're all used to now having Google Maps that gives you live traffic patterns. So when you go to leave your office or leave your home in the morning or at any time, you essentially can look ahead and see on your map where all the traffic and congestion is. And maybe you want to try and take an alternate route. Maybe it recommends an alternate route for you to get around that construction or where that vehicle accident is, or the photo radar station might be set up. And that type of crowdsourcing of information, that's really the big picture for us is getting as many aircraft around the world equipped as possible to provide that type of kind of network effect or crowdsourcing of that real-time live data.
Yeah, and that sounds like that's the golden deal, because then now over time, you're going to be gathering a lot of data and you'll be able to create a much more analytical way to look at from when people look at something from a high level and say, the humidity in Southern California in this area is a certain amount and other kinds of things. Maybe we shouldn't fly. Now you can more realistically know because you have a variety of aircraft flying in and out of many different conditions and actually measuring the relative safety based on using this technology.
Yeah, exactly. And in order to be able to do that, though, we have to start with how do we solve a problem that's valuable enough for us to put it in our hardware on aircraft? And that's where we've really landed on icing as the key thing here. What we're working on is adding additional sensors and components and features to the hardware layer that gives us first icing. Okay, what about turbulence now? Okay, now we can start mapping turbulence because while most aircraft ideally won't experience icing or potentially get exposed to icing in flight, every aircraft experiences some version of turbulence, right? We all know what bumpy rides looks like. And especially for small, light aircraft, that's obviously a lot harder to fly through. So as we're looking at this, we're solving the hardware challenge of getting our hardware on aircraft. And the wireless system allows us to essentially peel and patch it and onto an aircraft in hours, really. And for context, we've never had one come off, get detached, the wireless version. We use a really tough aerospace adhesive that allows us to put it on and it basically stays on, even if you're flying at over half the speed of sound, that type of thing like that. But the bigger picture here is, again, what are the most valuable pieces of information that we can give pilots? And then from there, it's actually not just aviation. You look at everybody else who relies on weather, and there's pretty much every industry on the planet, I think, has some subscription or uses some type of weather data to make informed decisions from agriculture to mining to forestry, you name it. So there's a really big market and extremely defensible for us because we have this proprietary hardware and more so the actual proprietary data that's coming off of the hardware that we can then network together, stitch, fuse, and then provide to other different, both aviation and other markets.
That's just amazing. And I'd like to, as we progress forward, to ask you then, Cole, what is next for Pegasus? The next thing, do you have some new things in the pipeline or extensions of things you're doing now that you can talk about?
Yeah. So what I can say is where we're at right now here in July of 2026 is at a really good inflection point. We've really seemed to have found a strong niche when it comes to early adopters on the defense side of the fence. And as we start to accelerate things, the biggest thing for us will be keeping our eye focused on this beachhead market in defense and delivering the maximum value to a warfighter and giving new capabilities to them. At the same time, we have a clear track into the next few years of other additional markets like commercial aviation and general aviation. And the sky's not really the limit for us. And I hate to be cheesy about the whole thing, but we'll have some pretty positive announcements, I think, throughout the rest of 2026 here.
That's exciting. And I'd just like to ask, as we roll towards a close, are there any parting words you'd like to leave us with?
Probably going full circle, Alan, I guess back to where we last left off and where we started this podcast. When we launched Pegasus in 2018, we were looking at developing aircraft really as the tool to solve commercial integration of drones into the national airspace system for basically non-military applications. MIDAS has turned out to be one of the technologies that we're just trying to solve a problem for ourselves. And you can't have a real company if you can't fly out of ground. And the forecasted icing was an impact to us. So we developed a solution for that. We're very lucky, I would say, as far as timing goes, that we met some major OEMs, like our partners over at Boeing. We met them early on, about 5 years ago, into that journey. And they're the ones who really saw that this was a clear pain point. The single best thing that we've done as a company, I think, is unfortunately wildfires aren't going to go anywhere. And it's also a very tough market to try to break into for any type of new technology, or especially any innovation where you're trying to apply that into an existing market. We've, instead of trying to run 4 different startups under the same roof, we've really narrowed and refined our focus over the last year and a half onto MIDAS and really put everything in the company behind that. This is probably the number one thing that I think we all speak about here inside the office with the team is it's just about focus. So that's the one thing I leave you with. We're laser focused on it's a really big opportunity. And that's probably the number one thing I would leave with.
Thanks a lot. And my final question is, how can our listeners reach you if they have other questions?
So we are on all social media. You can check out our website at FlyPegasus.ai. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, or Twitter. And you can always go to our website and catch through us by email or on the socials there.
So you said if they just look for FlyPegasus, that will get them everything like FlyPegasus.ai. Is that right? And then also,
yeah, FlyPegasus.ai.
And Pegasus is Pegasus, spelling wise, right?
Correct.
So FlyPegasus.ai. Once again, it's so great talking to you, Cole, as it always is, and finding out what you've got going on, the exciting things that you're doing. And I'd like to just reserve the opportunity again in about another 6 months to a year, hopefully, to catch up with you and see what you got going on at that time. And maybe you'll be getting into more commercial aircraft applications over time, which would be really cool, like airlines. That would be amazingly good. So yeah, thanks a lot for being on the podcast with us again.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Alan.
You bet. Thanks so much for tuning in to Inventors Helping Inventors. If you like the show, please tell your friends about it. Make sure to subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. Talk to you soon.